Well, 2020 is behind us, and the commentary on that difficult year has been thoroughly pundited. Can I make that a verb? Across all the socials. I'll only add that 2020 wasn't a complete SH fill in the last two letters yourself show. I got to enjoy a ton of extra time with my dog Ryder. And the federal government announced a $1.75 billion universal broadband fund to accelerate getting high-speed internet to rural and remote communities. The latter is the welcome news for our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Although, because they're nice people, I'm sure TELUS is happy for me and my pup too. Bridging the digital divide has long been their key priority. Over the years, TELUS has invested nearly $200 billion in network infrastructure, operations, and spectrum. That includes connecting over 800,000 rural and remote Canadians in 110 communities and 56 First Nations. Their service has been independently verified as the fastest rural broadband in Canada. But there's still a ton of heavy lifting to do. Over the next 5 years, TELUS is planning to connect an additional 3.5 million rural Canadians over almost 600,000 square kilometers. To get it done, it's going to take the committed partnership of all governments, federal, provincial, and Indigenous, and the will to overcome any roadblock or unforeseen delay. TELUS is committed to building these relationships so that all Canadians can digitally access every opportunity through a world-class network. Go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca to learn more. All right, Herle Burlyites, let's get to the pod. I hope your holiday break was rejuvenating, relaxing, and refreshingly free of the kinds of work-life stresses that only a secret vacation in St. Bart's can bring on. Welcome to our first Herle Burly of 2021. It's a jam-packed two-parter. For part one, we have Kathleen Petty zooming into the show from Alberta. A co-founding producer and host at CBC Newsworld, Kathleen was the longtime host of Today from Calgary. Today, she's executive producer of CBC News in Calgary and the host of the West of Centre podcast, providing news and analysis with a Western voice and perspective. So that's what we're going to talk about today, Western Canadian issues, before COVID, during COVID, and hopefully after COVID. Part two of the podcast is our Vacation, Indignation, and Resignation Special, featuring our political panel, Jenni, Byrne, and Scott Reid. We'll talk about the Rod Phillips debacle, why he had eggnog all over his face for releasing that Christmas Eve video from his living room when he was really sitting on a beach sipping rum punch in St. Bart's, and what the fallout for Doug Ford is. Similar dynamics are playing out in Alberta, with various UCP MLAs getting on planes and taking vacation despite the lockdown, and Tracy Allard resigning her cabinet position just yesterday. What kind of heat is Jason Kenney taking from all this, and is it different from Ford's? We'll also chat about the slow COVID vaccine rollout. Are the provinces letting the feds off the hook by not being able to distribute efficiently? And we'll each throw our first Hey You of 2021 out there into the digital ether. But first, Kathleen Petty. Kathleen, welcome to the Herle Burly today.
Can I just tell you, I was chuckling through the whole intro, so I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but I guess we'll find out.
Well, you know, it's dark times, so we try to bring a little levity to this. How are you?
You know what? I'm actually doing well. I always say that perspective is the most important thing to have in life, and I feel that way during COVID times as well. Because honestly, there are a lot of people who have a lot bigger struggles than I do. So from a personal point of view, I'm A-okay. Everything's fine. It's busy, but it's fine.
Right. You're working out of your home?
Just a couple of days a week, David. I go in for a few days a week. I work from home a couple of days a week. It's sort of the right mix. I do find working from home, there's some things I can do better from home, like this. As an example, right. I'm in my kitchen. It would be a little tougher to do it from work, to be honest. But so I just sort of divvy it up, and it's a little easier to do some things than others. And, I've gotten into a rhythm. I know a lot of people are working from home all the time. And I, for one, I think would struggle a little bit with that.
Right. And you've not been worried about going into work? Is there a lot of people in the office?
Yeah, there's probably 10% of the staff. No, I can't say that I'm worried that, they keep it pretty clean. We have lots of distancing. Everyone wears masks. No, I feel actually completely comfortable going in, which is Great. And honestly, I lead a pretty low-key lifestyle, David. I think you do too, because you're, out in the wilderness, and I'm not in the wilderness, although sometimes it feels that way. Being in Alberta, it does feel a bit like the wilderness from time to time. But honestly, I lead a pretty quiet life. I mean, the highlight of my day is taking the dog for a walk.
You know what? That's a highlight of any day. You shouldn't downgrade that. That is, if you've got a good dog, it's going to get you through a lot of bad days. She's in the basement, so she doesn't make a surprise appearance, just so you know. So she's... oh, really? She'd be welcome.
Good to know.
She'd be welcome. Yeah. So this was a pretty dramatic week in Alberta politics and Saskatchewan politics, I guess. But Mo just seemed to slide by the whole thing in the way that he has that province in some sort of somnambulistic trance. That nobody questions anything he does. But Kenny seemed to go different. Kenny was on fire from New Year's Day when he did that news conference until he pivoted the other day and yesterday and fired people. So does that end the issue for him, or is he still in trouble personally?
Well, let me just pick up on Mo just briefly. You'll notice the order in which things happened, right? So we've got a firing in Ontario. You've got Scott Moe saying he's not going to punt his minister who is traveling. And then you've got Jason Kenney saying he's not going to punt any of his people. And then come Monday, Moe does punt his minister of highways. And we saw what Jason Kenney did. I think here's the issue for him. There was an expectation on Friday, on January 1st, when he went to the trouble of having a news conference on a holiday, that he was going to announce something big. And by big, it was to address all the stories about members of his caucus and indeed his cabinet and his chief of staff traveling, when the advisory was the people were to not go anywhere except for really essential, and we can talk about what essential means a little bit later, except for essential travel. And he basically took it on himself. He tried to sort of take the blame, thinking that he could absorb it, and said that his directives were not specific enough. So he essentially said it was all my fault. On Monday, he said it was their fault. So it was his fault on Friday, it was their fault on Monday, and they were punted. So cabinet minister, who was only recently promoted to cabinet, by the way, his chief of staff, which in many ways might even be the bigger piece of this, honestly, and then a parliamentary secretary, and then, the sort of different committee work for those MLAs. So does that staunch the bleeding? It might, but I think most people have concluded that the damage has already been done. His moral authority on COVID and COVID restrictions in particular has been damaged to a great degree. And as one observer said to me, and this was on Friday, he said, Jason Kenney has managed to do the impossible. He's united the left, the right, and the center, and they're all ticked off.
So Kenney's renowned to be an astute political operator. Kenney built that party himself. Mm-hmm. You would presume he knows the base of it very, very well. How did he so miscalculate how much slack those people were going to give him on New Year's Day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know who he's taking advice from. I know he doesn't have a longstanding chief of staff to go to, and he has lost key people in his office over the last number of months as well. People that like Howard Anglin is one of them, and now obviously Jamie Huckabee, and so that's not going to help him. He obviously thought he had more political capital to spend than he did, because he clearly concluded that he could be the one to sort of take the blame for this. But the anger, the outpouring was quite phenomenal. And of course, we do rely largely, David, as you know, on social media, but you could see it there. I went to the Facebook pages of all the MLAs caught up in this, including the cabinet minister, to see what the reaction was. And it was bad. And it's particularly on Facebook, I find that more revealing, frankly, than, say, Twitter, because that's a very different universe, as you know. And I think a lot of us, and I include myself in this, sometimes make the mistake of taking too much guidance or reading too much into Twitter reaction. Facebook reaction is often more revealing, because there are, sort of a lot more just regular people who engage that way. And, he acknowledged the anger on Monday, but the problem becomes that he couldn't recognize it on Friday. And so if he had done that on Monday or on Friday, I think we might be looking at a very different scenario. But at the end of the day, there are people who couldn't go to the funerals of their parents because they were told not to travel. And,
right.
We had an analysis piece by one of our people today, and I thought it really nailed it, is Jason Kenney, as you know, rails against elitism, particularly the Laurentian elite, but the elite generally. And the problem becomes that they look like the elite themselves. They look like they have become exactly what they have railed against. And
right.
so that really hurts the brand. And when the brand is hurt, I think you've got serious issues that you have to deal with. And I'm not sure how he comes back, but I'll be fascinated to watch.
I'm interested in the reaction of his base. I'm interested in the reaction of conservatives, because normally when a government gets in trouble, it gets attacked from a lot of sources, but its partisans line up to defend it. And that's happened to him in a number of cases. But what was striking to me in this case was, the absolute silence of defending Jason Kenney from conservatives, either grassroots or active and prominent. And secondly, that many of them felt emboldened to actually go out and attack him and criticize him and call for his resignation and call for all kinds of things. So this has obviously bothered conservatives in Alberta a lot, and made and in a way that overrode their partisan instinct to defend. Do you have any insight into why this particular thing had that power?
Well, first of all, I'll just say that there's been erosion on his right for a while. We've been seeing that tracked. There's a great academic who has a wonderful project where he tracks public opinion in Alberta, Jared Wesley at the University of Alberta. And he's shown that there's been an erosion on his right flank. That's been happening for a while. It's accelerated with COVID. And of course, I'll be very interested to see what pollsters find when they go into the field to see if it's eroded further. But there is, a significant portion on his right flank, and it's his right flank that he's most worried about. He doesn't have a left flank, so there's nothing to worry about over there. And so there's that piece of it. The other thing is that, the question will become, has he damaged himself enough that people who might have been not just respectful of him, but a little bit fearful of him? In other words, that, he sort of has the power to cajole, influence, sort of, force a direction. Has that been eroded to the extent that those who've been sort of waffling about how they feel will now come to the fore? Because it's really important to also note, and different people have made this point in recent days, that the UCP is really, I think a lot of people see it more as a sort of a reinvigorated Wild Rose. Even though it was a merger of the Progressive Conservatives and the Wild Rose, it's the Wild Rose that's really the core, the spirit, the spine of what this
in the same way that the federal conservatives, in the same way that the federal conservatives are more reformed than they are progressive conservatives.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would make that argument that that's the core of their caucus, and you saw people who were from the PC sort of traditions fall away. And we've, seen that to a certain extent here. So, but the Wild Rose sort of principles are not about elitism, I can assure you. And I sort of go back to my earlier point that is, that's why Jason Kenney campaigned driving around in a blue truck and, did his news conferences at the Blackfoot Diner, right? That was part of the persona and the brand that he was building. And this really cuts into that brand. And as you know better than anyone, brand is big. And if you lose that, it's really hard to sort of figure out then how you position yourself going forward.
So if he's been bleeding support, and especially bleeding support to the right even before COVID, what's that been about? This is a brand new government. It's only a couple of years in. It shouldn't be in trouble.
Well, I guess you saw that with sort of the toing and froing on COVID restrictions. Alberta, we should say, in the first part of the pandemic, actually did very well. And it didn't have as many restrictions as a lot of other places. The case counts were actually pretty low. We opened up fairly early, and we opened up, fairly enthusiastically when we started sort of dropping the restrictions. And I think people had a fairly easy summer of it. And then, of course, the second wave came around, and I think a lot of people felt that it took too long to acknowledge that. And, Jason Kenney, and I'm sure you've heard this, he always talked about lives and livelihoods. You even saw that on Friday when he was trying to diffuse this crisis. He talked about supporting WestJet, right? I mean, that's just sort of where he goes. And you can have some sympathy for it as well, because Alberta really is in an existential crisis. Now, that's sort of a phrase that is often overused, I think, but it actually is very apt, I think, for this province. And that's in part what he's trying to balance as well. We've got a $21 billion deficit. That is huge. So the finances are very strained. Money coming in from the oil and gas sector is just sort of dripping in. In the last fiscal update, I think money from the federal government, if it wasn't the largest amount in the fiscal update, it was pretty darn close. The only thing that might have beat it by a tad would be tax revenue. So he probably isn't too wild about that. That most of the finances are coming from the feds right now. So he does have a lot of things he's trying to balance, but I think he talked so much about the economy, and people felt that he wasn't taking sort of the health crisis as seriously as many people wanted, that he didn't quite get that balance right. But it's also very much a demonstration of the quandary, of the dilemma that Jason Kenney is confronting. And I will say, I don't envy him. We've talked about the bad hand that Rachel Notley got dealt in 2015 with declining oil prices, but the hand she was dealt isn't anywhere near as bad as the one Kenney was dealt.
But in terms of COVID, what you're telling me is that he was constrained from implementing the kinds of health measures that some people in Alberta would have wanted in restrictions, because he's got this base of voters who are already in revolt against his government, and have a right-wing alternative in the whatever the hell it's called, and the
Wild Rose Independence Party is one of them, just in case you're wondering. And then there's the Maverick Party. The
Maverick Party. That's what I was. That's what I was thinking about. The Sarah Palin Party.
Remember, that's federal. The Maverick Party's federal.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Maverick Party.
Yeah.
So he's worried about his right. He was constrained because he couldn't enforce those kinds of restrictions without shearing off the political support he needs to govern. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, yes. And he went so far as to say that he thought restrictions, particularly in areas outside of Edmonton and Calgary in particular, but, more rural areas, that imposing restrictions would be counterproductive. He did make that argument. He felt that, he wanted to sort of persuade people to just do it rather than tell people to do it, because I think he felt instinctively that if he told them, they would do the opposite. And he talked often about how people wearing masks was increasing in these areas without sort of imposing restrictions. And it's because people want to be able to come to it on their own. So, that very sort of libertarian way of approaching life and sort of recognizing that libertarian streak. I mean, he finally relented, But that's what he was trying to do. So he was trying to look at the province not sort of as a whole, but, you know, parceling it out, trying to understand sort of how the psychological, political point of view and try and parse it out that way. But, you know, it was not working. And he finally realized that it wasn't working. So it really has been a journey for him to sort of come around to this point of view. I think he was largely sort of congratulated for finally imposing the restrictions. But here's the problem for Jason Kenney. It's always, people always go, great, but you should have done it sooner. And it was the same thing Friday versus Monday with his caucus and his cabinet minister. It was too late. So if you make that decision, you're making it because you're sort of being forced into it, not because you and your core actually believe this, right? This isn't coming from a set of principles that you hold. This is, you know, purely politics and trying to survive. And he does, you know, it leaves the impression that he's struggling.
Well, that's kind of how he framed it, isn't it, Kathleen? He said, it's clear that people don't accept this. Mm-hmm. Not that, upon reflection, I don't accept it.
Yeah.
He basically said, the political response has forced this. Not that I've come to any conclusion myself about this.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's exactly what he said.
Interesting and ineffective way to frame it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose he let the people of Alberta know, you got as much power as you choose to wield, is what he told them. Right? Because he referred to the anger that he was listening to over a few days. And it was based on that anger that he was making this decision. Now, I suppose you could argue that would be sort of a populist move, right? He's acknowledging the people have spoken and I listen to the people. And so if I'm Jason Kenney, I suppose that's the way I would frame that. But others will frame it differently, that you sort of came to this too late and not based on your own convictions, but rather based on the backlash that you've had from the population, as I said earlier, that's coming from, you know, the left, the right, and the center. Keeping in mind that there are a lot of people on the right who don't like the restrictions in the first place. So so, you know, there's that element of it as well, right? There are many people who, there's a gym owner in Lethbridge, and he's done this before, but he did a Facebook video just yesterday saying, that's it. We're opening on January 11th. I don't care about the restrictions. If MLAs can travel, I can open my gym. And it's not that he thought the MLA shouldn't travel. Let's be clear. He thought it was
his gym should be open.
They traveled.
Yeah.
Exactly. If they can travel, I can open my gym. And he's putting a call out to everyone going, if you've been closed down, I want you to join me on the 11th. Now, you know, I don't know how many followers he's got or if it's got, and apparently he's, excuse me, made this argument before, but that becomes the other dilemma for Kenney, it seems to me, is has he lost the moral authority to lead? Right? Like, how can you ask sacrifices of people, especially people who were not completely on board with those sacrifices in the first place? Now, how do you ask them to sacrifice when, you know, you didn't expect that, at least on Friday,
yeah.
Or before Friday, you didn't expect that of members of your own caucus?
Yeah, these things all came in all the provinces. This travel story came at a very bad time, because I really get the sense that social solidarity is fraying in the country right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we certainly didn't need to give people any more reason to think that they don't need to adhere.
No.
The rules.
And you know, he kept talking about, again, early in the pandemic, personal responsibility. See, that was the other biggie. Right? He talked a lot about personal responsibility.
Where was his chief of staff's personal responsibility?
Exactly. And that was also the spine of his argument against not putting in more restrictions, that he was going to leave it up to Albertans right, to exercise personal responsibility. So, you know, there's the, and then finally, as I say, relented and realized that he had to impose them. And then having done that, you know, clearly the expectations were different for his MLAs, and we get back to that that theme of elitism. And you know better than anyone, you know, how much of a theme that is, particularly out of this province, about elites. And so, yeah, it sort of comes full circle. I mean, I'm sure it's got to be fascinating for someone like you to watch this and sort of wonder about the kind of advice he's been getting. And it's going to be super interesting to see what he does going forward. Because the other thing is so interesting. He had a news conference on Friday. Like, he made himself available to media to basically say, I'm not going to do anything except tell them to come home. Like, I'm going to tell them to travel one more time and come home. And, but, you know, on Monday, when, you know, he's got all these consequences, it's a Facebook post, because that's how he told people. It was a Facebook post, and then he posted it on Twitter, and no media availability. And I would say that I understand why he's not having media availability. I mean, I would like him to have one. Obviously, we have a lot of questions for the Premier, because, you know, a lot of people also want to know, are there any others? Have you asked all of your MLAs what they did over the holidays? Do we know about all of them? Because the other issue here is the drip, drip, drip. That is also what hurt. From Friday to Monday, it was, you know, more ended up being revealed that we didn't know about, that hadn't been disclosed on Friday when he did have the media availability. There we are Monday. He's got a list of people who are being demoted and, or in the case of Jamie Huckabee, fired, his chief of staff, but we still don't know about every member of his caucus. And the problem becomes for them, and I sort of wonder about the dilemma for him here is, you know, there are members of his caucus who feel, and, you know, I've been told privately this, that they are sort of guilty until proven innocent. Right? It's like you have to confirm now what every single MLA did or didn't do. And it seems to me, just get it over with, right? Here are the MLAs who've traveled, and here are the ones who aren't. And so that they don't have to sort of suffer under that, I wonder if this person or that person went here or there, because that becomes damaging to the caucus. And so you have to wonder what kind of damage that is doing within the caucus, because, as you know, caucus disunity and caucus unrest is dangerous for any political leader.
That's for sure. Well, I'm certain that they're all angry, the ones that stayed home, because they're all being tarred with that. Yeah. With the same brush. The thing that one of the things that I find super interesting about Alberta politics, and it's been one of the big surprises of my political life, has been the emergence of Alberta as a competitive political jurisdiction, where it is conceivable to talk about the Conservatives losing power, where an issue like this actually has that kind of consequence, where you could imagine them losing the government. They've lost it before, and the NDP remain a viable, competitive alternative. This was not the case at any point in my life, really. Where have the Notley NDP come from? Where did this viable alternative? And I might say, by the way, that it is the first challenge to government from the left in Alberta history. Like, there was, and you know, before Liberals come at me about Lawrence Decore, there was a chance once in the early 90s that Don Getty could have lost power, and Ralph Klein replaced him, and he could have lost to Lawrence Decore, the Liberal mayor of Edmonton. But let's be clear, Decore was mounting a challenge from the right. Decore's argument was that the Getty-Klein Conservatives were not conservative enough. And that's where all the challenges have historically come from to the progressive conservative movement, is from the right. So I'm fascinated that there is now a viable challenge from the left, and it must signify some really big changes in the Alberta culture that maybe you could illuminate for us.
Well, here's what I would say. I know the NDP is perceived to be from the left. The Alberta NDP, I would argue, is the center. And I would also argue that the PCs were the center. The Progressive Conservatives were the center. I think the NDP was the left when the PCs were in the center. But when they stopped to exist, or they were starting to fall apart, I think Rachel Notley, first of all, and people who don't like the NDP as a party, like Rachel Notley. So that's the first thing to remember. She's a very, very potent, powerful political leader. And she had no problem disagreeing with Tom Mulcair or Jagmeet Singh on just about anything, or John Horgan in BC either, right? So her brand, we talked about brand earlier, her brand is as an Albertan, and that's what she's sort of, that's the horse that she's been riding. And she actually does ride horses. That's the other thing. So that probably helps as well. And so I hear what you're saying, but I'm not so sure that the delineations are as sort of cut and dried as perhaps they once were, because, the NDP up until Notley won was not a political force in this country. And we used to sort of joke every time we would do election coverage, and I anchored a lot of election coverage. And of course we do rehearsals, and I know you've been involved in those, so you know how the CBC rehearses everything, to smithereens. Rehearsing PC defeat was not something we spent a lot of time on, right? So we could call the government about 5 minutes after the polls closed. And that, you're right, that has all changed, right? There has been a pivot. I can see that some of it is, over time, lots of people have moved here, and that maybe has changed the complexion. But I would also argue that the PCs, until they lost their way, and they did lose their way, were very good at understanding the province and sort of doing this to a certain extent. I mean, Klein was this, all right? Get out in front of the parade and see where it's going, right? See where the parade is going and get out in front of it. That was how he operated. I think Lougheed was, more a man.
That's how he won his first election.
Yeah, for sure. But, Lougheed was more a person, like, he understood the province, but he also could persuade the province, right? He could cajole, he could, he would lead. He could take perhaps somewhat unpopular points of view and persuade Albertans it was the right way to go. So he had a lot of credibility, and he had a lot of empathy. Actually, Klein had a lot of empathy in his own way, very different from Lougheed. But what I would say is the PCs were a pretty good machine in making sure that the center was a really big piece of geography. So it captured the center and the left and the right. I mean, it truly was a big tent. And the tent started to get smaller. And then, people defected. And then we ended up with Wild Rose. And so you also had all those divisions which assisted the NDP. Let's not forget. So, and just a general weariness after 44 years of one government. And they were considered elitist. I mean, that was a big part of the problem for the PCs, David, as you'll recall. I mean, they came to be seen as elitist. I mean, Alison Redford, her Sky Palace, taking flights and, rejigging the manifest to make it look like it was a full flight when it wasn't. So she didn't have to travel with people she didn't want to travel with. I mean, that is elitism. And I think, Jim Prentice.
Look in the mirror was probably considered an elitist thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's your fault, not mine. And also, he came from away, I don't know that I know, like it was sort of like Michael Ignatieff. That's sort of how I look. I didn't come back for you, So I think there was a little element of that involved as well. So I think they sort of lost their way. And with that opportunity, the NDP was able to sort of take advantage of that. But, remember, a lot of the people who ran for them actually didn't have a lot of political experience. Rachel Notley really struggled to fill her front bench. So a lot of what they did was on the strength of her brand. But
and what is that brand, Kathleen?
Situation. Well, you know,
what is that brand?
She's a true blue Albertan, number one. She was fighting for pipelines, and people wanted to see that. She was willing to disagree vociferously with her NDP colleagues from across the country. And I think that was key. I think it was key to call them out and actually be angry with them. And right. And John Horgan and Jagmeet Singh in particular, right? She everything she did was from an Alberta point of view. Now you could criticize specific policies and the way she was going, and certainly there were people in this province who felt that this was not the tradition of the province, that she was governing from the left. But I think most political observers who not with a partisan hat on argued that she actually pivoted pretty much to the center. It just took them a while to find their footing, because they did have a lot of really inexperienced people in cabinet. But now she's got a very experienced team, because many of them have been in cabinet, and they've certainly been in government as part of a government caucus. So, this is now a different machine than the one right. That the Conservatives or, the people that ran themselves as Conservatives faced in 2015. And the problem for Kenney becomes, after uniting these factions, and as I say, I think Wildrose is still very much the spine of it, is there going to be some fraying of that? And I think that's the real danger for him.
It's interesting, isn't it, Kathleen, that whether it was federally under the reconstituted Conservative Party or provincially under the reconstituted UCP, they rebuilt something that was smaller than what they destroyed.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not sure that I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to think about that. I'm not sure that it's smaller. I just think it's sort of how you wield it. I know what you're saying. Like, I suppose you could, those of the PC tradition might feel more comfortable in the NDP, I guess is what you're saying, provincially. Might sort of lean toward their policies. So I do sort of get what you're saying. You could probably say that about the CPC as well. I mean, it is an interesting comparison to make, isn't it? That those of the progressive conservative sort of side of things, they probably don't want to run for the NDP. I don't think but in terms of sort of natural inclinations and leanings, you probably have a point there that maybe the tent has gotten smaller is essentially what you're saying, but it's still that right flank is that's the one to watch. It's really interesting to see that, because you and I talked the other day, and I was talking about the Fair Deal panel, which is something I paid a lot of attention to. I'm not sure the rest of the country has, but part of that was to address that sentiment, right? There's a separatist sentiment, which, is still relatively small, but it could prove to be problematic. And it could
stop and tell us how seriously we should take it. How seriously should we take that?
I think it's hard. It's hard to see the evidence of there being an electoral impact at this point. Because, the other thing to remember is certainly federally, as you know, Jay Hill is the head of this Maverick Party, which was sort of a rebranding of the Wexit Party. And he's, as you know, a former Conservative House leader during Stephen Harper's time as Prime Minister. So I think they feel that they've got sort of a legitimate leader. I think it's 49 seats he's targeting. But Conservatives federally win by larger margins than Conservatives provincially. So as popular as Conservatives have been provincially, although it's a little more the ground has shifted a little bit, obviously provincially, but always the federal Conservatives have done better in Alberta than provincial Conservatives. The margins they win by are astonishing, as you know. And, it's not unusual to see someone win with 70% of the vote, 80% of the vote even, but certainly more than 50% of the vote. So they win outright. Yeah. And so you could see that the Maverick Party would erode some of that margin. What's hard to see is them necessarily taking a seat. But I'm not in the prediction game, and I find the people who predict are almost always proven wrong. So I think it's I don't know. It's really hard to say, but you can clearly see even Scott Moe on election night. He won like a huge majority, as you know. But who did he speak to that night? He didn't speak to people who voted NDP, who came in second. He spoke to the Buffalo Party, which is their sort of version of the Maverick Party, except provincially. That's who he spoke to. Those voters is who he was reaching out to. So it's clearly a concern there, even though, they certainly weren't in contention to win any seats, but they got enough of the vote that he was worried enough to talk to them. He knows the NDP will never come to him, so he didn't even bother talking to them. And it's a similar situation, I think, for Jason Kenney. He needs to speak to those people as well. But, you can embolden them, right? You can be the accelerant for the fire that they're starting. So if it's just a few embers and just a few flickers,
boost their credibility.
Totally. Yeah. And in a way, the Fair Deal panel is an example of that, because he put this panel together to look at, he's an avowed federalist. He will tell you he's not a separatist, and he's said that time and time again. But this Fair Deal panel is all about autonomy, right? Yeah. It is about carving out more autonomy for Alberta, and it's not unlike the kinds of provisions that Quebec has, and that is the comparison he would make as well. So he wants to be able to opt out of federal programs and take the money, have tax points transferred. We might have a referendum on a provincial pension plan, which there's no polling that
would be a fun referendum. I'll come work on that. I bet you that goes well for the government.
Yeah, I mean, there's no polling that suggests he's got a hope. So I somehow doubt that's going to end up on a ballot. But the equalization referendum will, for sure.
But nobody knows what it is or what they're voting on.
Well, I mean, that is by far the most misunderstood federal program in the country, and certainly in Alberta. I don't know if you've ever talked to Trevor Toome. You probably know who Trevor is. But
I follow him on Twitter, but I haven't talked to him.
He's remarkable. He's really something. He actually does seminars on equalization. Like he actually holds for free that people can come. So they. I
must remember not to sign up for one of those.
Well, but it's just he's really trying to sort of explain it to people because it's so misunderstood, but it becomes weaponized, and at the core, what it is, I think a lot of Albertans, and this is what Kenny's trying to tap into, is that at the core of this, I think Albertans feel, look, we're in big trouble here, right? There's this huge transition going on. We've got this carbon tax. We have people talking about the end of fossil fuels, which has been, obviously the fuel that has run this economy and paid for hospitals, roads, education. And it has also paid for a lot of things across the country. And we've been, net contributors to Confederation by a large margin for a long time because the incomes have been so high, because the economy has been so hot. And here we are struggling. And, no one seems to give a crap. I mean, that's basically what the message is. And equalization is the proxy to be able to sort of express that dissatisfaction. So that's how it's being used. So it's being weaponized. And honestly, who wants to sit down and sort of like, as great as Trevor is, and some people do go to a seminar, most people aren't interested in a seminar on equalization. And so it gets politicized and poorly understood. They just think that
Alberta cuts Quebec a check.
Yeah.
People think Alberta cuts Quebec a check, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure they do.
Right.
But it, it's important not to also forget just sort of the general feeling like, we've given a lot and now we feel like we're under attack. And I think that is how a lot of people feel. So although I think equalization is misunderstood, I also think it's important to remember why it's misunderstood.
It's powerful, and why it's become a powerful symbol.
Why it's been so easily weaponized. Because one of the big mistakes I think we've seen in politics, and I would argue, not that we want to talk about the U.S., but I think Donald Trump, the whole Donald Trump saga has been very instructive there, is we need to understand why people vote the way they do, why they react the way they do, why you can tap into certain things, like what's at the core of it. And I've made this argument many times, and I continue to make it. I actually don't think we know each other very well. I don't think Canadians know each other very well at all. And I think we need to do a better job of understanding each other. It's part of the reason why I wanted to do West of Centre. That was a core part of the reason. Now, it's a political podcast. I don't pretend that it's, serving some like huge higher purpose, but I'm hoping it's at least serving some purpose in helping people understand each other, because I really don't think we make enough of an effort to do that.
Okay, so let's make an effort right now. Let's make an effort right now. Many Canadians from non-oil producing provinces do not understand why Albertans have the attitudes and opinions that they do. What do Albertans think that Easterners do not understand?
Oh, that's a great question. What do Easterners not understand? First of all, that we're not a caricature and we're not a stereotype. And I would argue that goes both ways, by the way. I think we're as guilty of it as Central Canada is. And when we talk about Easterners, we're actually talking about Central Canada, as you know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. But I'm sure people in Atlantic Canada are like, "Where are you talking about us?" Because they're Easterners, right? So there's sort of, and believe me, people in BC hate it when people in Central Canada talk about the West, or and they're actually talking about Alberta. And I would say that people in Alberta, and I'm guilty of it, I talk about the West, and they're not wrong. I mean, I'm talking about a portion of BC sometimes, but not, so you're
talking about Alberta and it's little brother Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Right. Buffalo. Buffalo. Right. Exactly. Talk to Brad Wall about Buffalo. So how powerful would we be if we were all one party? But I guess I would say Alberta has a greater diversity of view than people think we do. I would argue Alberta is not right wing. We're largely centrist. We might tilt a little bit on the right side of center, but the opinion is much more varied than people think it is, and it's much more nuanced. It's highly educated. Very young, and and high incomes, as we know, and a lot of it is on the back of oil and gas. But there's a greater broad spectrum of opinion than I think people assume, and I think in part people came to that conclusion because we did vote PC for 44 years. But then I go back to my previous premise. The PCs were just a really nimble party in being able to sort of capture where the province was going and where it wanted to go. And when it stopped being able to do that, Albertans voted NDP. I mean, so that they were able to sort of make that move. They do sort of go to, the political parties that speak to them. And the parties here got, a little less, as I say, the PC's nimble at being able to do that. So that's one thing. Albertans are very generous, and I think they like, that they have really liked their role as sort of a big economic engine of the country, because I think they've always felt that politically they didn't have clout, just because of numbers and because of the way the system works. So you don't have as much clout politically, but if you've got economic clout, you have other ways sort of into the conversation. And so now that they see the economic clout also eroding, and in addition to political clout, and so you sort of feel like you've been cut adrift. And I'm not sure whether Central Canada understands that either, right? And that's a dilemma for this place, because we are almost assuredly going to be voting Conservative in the next election, which will very likely, I think most people think it'll be this year. And I don't know who will end up winning, but if it's a Liberal government again, then that is going to exacerbate the situation even more. It may be a Conservative win. I guess we'll have to see. But I think that's a big piece of it. Albertans feel like they've made a big contribution to the country, and that contribution is not recognized. And now the basis of that contribution is being demonized.
They're right about that. They're right about that. That's both.
Like in the last election, I spoke to the CEO of Meg Energy, and I'm trying to remember exactly the quote from him, but basically what he said was, "I shaved my horns off for this meeting." In other words, like that he understands the country to see oil CEOs as being the devil incarnate. And that was his reference. "I shaved my horns off for this meeting." He said, told me that my workers are so demoralized, they think that each and every one of them is personally responsible for global warming, and that they're not worthy of being Canadians. That's what he told me. I'll never forget that. And I don't think Central Canada understands that either. So that's really what it is. That's the dilemma. And I'm not sure exactly how we fix that. But when the people doing most of the talking, who get most of the spotlight, who get most of the coverage, are politicians from any party trying to score points, I don't think it helps. And trying to sort of weaponize and politicize the conversation, it doesn't help. And I say this as someone who's covered politics for a long time, and I enjoy politics, as I know you do too. But I do worry about the conversations that we're having right now. I don't think it's good for the country, and I don't think it's good for the province.
So, Kathleen, I'm a person who believes climate change is the threat to us in this, and I support virtually anything that's aggressive to deal with it. At the same time, I'm very, very sensitive to the fact that means that we have a federal government policy that is designed to make Alberta and Saskatchewan less rich than they would otherwise be, and to ultimately phase out the major industry of those two provinces. And my question to you is there a grand bargain of some type out there that would make climate policy less divisive in Canada? What could be done that would make Alberta and Saskatchewan feel part of this effort rather than the brunt of this effort?
Well,
the Notley-Trudeau deal, they tried to have a deal, and that didn't really cut it. The pipeline for carbon tax trade, that didn't really seem to change anybody's opinion in Alberta.
No, I mean, not everyone is. I mean, we don't love the carbon tax. I mean, that's for sure. If we lose I'll get to your point in a moment, but I would, if we lose in the Supreme Court, by we, I mean Alberta, and, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Alberta ends up, we'll see, I don't know what Jason Kenney's going to think about this comment, but I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that at some point Alberta, if they lose, if there's no way around it, if they just take on the carbon tax themselves, because at least they can figure out what to do with the revenue, right? And, if it's sort of a fait accompli, that's how it could be framed. We have no choice anyway. We have no other avenues to oppose it. So it probably makes more sense to have the revenue here. So there, that's sort of the pure politics of it. In terms of sort of getting on board with climate change, I will tell you, look, a lot of people here feel the same way. It's not like Albertans don't, generally believe that the climate is changing. I know that there are people, however, because I've spoken to them, and I include the oil industry in this, who see it as a global problem more than a Canadian problem. That's part of the issue, right? They'll tell you, there are no borders for emissions, and and on a per capita basis, our emissions may be, higher than we'd like. In a global sense, in terms of impact on the actual climate, it's not that big. So, and I know a lot of people don't like that argument. I'm just telling you that is how a lot of people feel. So that we're making changes that erode the ability to finance a lot of the things that go on in this country. Even the governor of the Bank of Canada said that in a speech not that long ago, saying that, to be able to fund, we need to be able to export our fossil fuels, because it will, as we start working toward a transition, I think if people could sort of see the plan, like the bigger plan, and that's why I found what Macklin said so interesting, it can help fund that transition, because people forget that, this industry, in terms of value, is the largest export we have. This is it, right? And we're an exporting nation. It may not be the largest GDP, but in terms of export value in an exporting nation, it's been huge, traditionally huge. And, it depends how you want to carve it up, crude, and you want to talk about, petrochemicals and sort of add it all together. But I can tell you it's massive in terms of billions of dollars. And so I think it would help if people could sort of sell a bigger vision of what it looks like. So fossil fuels right now are necessary. People use them. People are driving their cars because of them. They're heating their homes because of them, and so on and so forth. And so just sort of acknowledging that. And if we're going to start transitioning to something else, there needs to be a plan. People have to be able to understand the plan, I think, to be able to really, and Alberta has to, and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland have to be able to see their role in that plan, and a role that it can not just sustain those provinces, but can give those provinces confidence that they have a future where, they continue to be, a big contributor to the Federation. I think that's what's necessary here. And that's not how people are feeling. And that's really the challenge for policymakers, but also for politicians trying to sell that policy.
In an adult world, Kathleen, wouldn't people from the federal government and the two prairie governments be working, and have been working for some time, on trying to figure out what people in Alberta are going to do for a living in 2040?
Yeah, no, I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, that is what has to be discussed. And we're looking now at hydrogen, and hydrogen, I think, is going to be a huge market. But again, it's sort of, there's that division. Then it becomes, like Quebec will tell you, yeah, but we're going to do green hydrogen, and Alberta's going to be doing blue hydrogen, right? And and so now, there's sort of this sense of competition with Quebec, because of course they'll use hydro, and we'll be using natural gas, and the federal government has signed on to blue hydrogen, so that's good. But I think that's what people are hungering for, is a vision. What's the vision? What does it actually look like? And it's really hard to do that in a federation when you have political sniping, and and always the electoral horizon is influencing everything all the time between provincial and federal governments. not to mention just the history of Alberta with, federal Liberals and Trudeau's in particular. And so it's not a surprise. I mean, that's why it was so tricky for Notley being sort of, allying herself with Trudeau and then realizing that she had to extricate herself from that alliance because it proved to be damaging.
Right. Quick question about the Liberals. Are they going to pick up any seats in the Prairies?
No. I mean, as it stands, right, if there was an election today, no, I don't think so. No, I can't see that.
Not even Winnipeg?
No. Oh, no. Winnipeg, maybe. I don't know Manitoba well enough to be confident about Manitoba, but I don't see it in Alberta and Saskatchewan. No. But as I told you earlier, like as you and I,
it would be more likely Alberta than Saskatchewan now.
Oh, for sure.
We're in a weird place now where it's more likely that Liberals will be elected in Alberta than Saskatchewan, right? Saskatchewan has no urban.
It doesn't get more true blue than Saskatchewan. I agree. And Alberta's not far behind, but I don't know, something about federal Liberals. There's just a toxicity about that brand here right now, but never say never. I no longer, I can't be surprised anymore. I'm post-surprised. I used to more frequently get surprised by stuff, not now. Nothing surprises me now. Anything's possible.
Well, this attitude about federal Liberals, I can assure you, is not new. It existed when I lived in Saskatchewan very strongly. Yeah. And John Diefenbaker said in the 1960s, I think, that Liberals in Saskatchewan were protected only by the game laws.
Is that what he said? Is that what he said?
Yeah.
That's a quote?
protected only by the game laws.
Oh, dear. Yeah. Well, you and I lived in Saskatchewan, I think, around the same time, didn't we? Weren't we there both in the 80s?
We were there in the 80s. Yep, the Grant Devine go-go 80s.
Yeah.
Did you get a hot tub?
I did
you get a free hot tub?
I mean, I'll tell you what, just about everyone else did get a hot tub. I know.
Absolutely,
right?
why not?
What was that? It was like $10,000 to improve your house.
Renovate your home. Here it goes.
Renovate your home. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it well.
Kathleen, we could go. You have to come back because we haven't even scratched the surface of this. But I want to end. Mm-hmm. I want to end because this is we're talking about dark stuff and everything feels kind of dark right now. I just want you to tell me, you're a Calgarian. You lived in Calgary your whole life.
Yeah.
Tell us what you love about Calgary. Just tell us about Calgary for a minute.
Calgary was always a place where you felt anything was possible, first of all. I always felt like anything was possible. So we talk about this entrepreneurial spirit, and I think it's true. I think I do think that is sort of the what makes people here tick. They're very proud of that. I mean, there may be an element of myth to it, I suppose, but that's okay. Because if you believe in the myth, you can sort of live the myth. And so I love that about this place. The other thing I would say is Alberta is just beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful province. And I'm in, I would argue, the best part of the province geographically in terms of beauty. And my Edmonton friends will not be surprised to hear me say this. And they're probably, I'll probably hear about it later. But truthfully, we have the Rockies. I mean, when I drive to my grocery store, David, and I'm fairly centrally located. I'm not downtown, but I'm fairly centrally located. I drive to my grocery store, I can see the Rockies, right? And there's a place that I like to go for lunch, and you'll appreciate this. It's called the Chuck Wagon. And the Chuck Wagon is in Turner Valley. And everyone who comes here, I tell them to go there for lunch. So now the Chuck Wagon's getting a free ad. But what I love about it is it's the drive. So I drive through the foothills and ranching country, and there's nothing quite like ranching country, I have to say. But on the horizon, the Rockies are still there. And then you go into small town Turner Valley, you sit down, and the steak you're eating was mooing 5 minutes before that outside the door of the restaurant. And it's hard to beat that. So that's what I love about it. You can do things on a dime. You don't have to plan for it. You know, I've spent a fair amount of time in Toronto, and I always found anytime you wanted to sort of get out of the city and do anything, you had to plan. You had to plan to do that. You just didn't do that on the spur of the moment. This is still a place you can do things on the spur of the moment. And the one other thing I'll tell you is you can. The Jubilee Auditorium is sort of where all the big shows are. So, you know, I went to see Les Mis at the Jube years ago. And you go to a place like that in Calgary, and you see women in ball gowns and women in jeans and everything in between. And that's what I probably love the most. You know, here I am sitting in my plaid shirt, and it's, you know, it's a pretty casual place, right? It's pretty relaxed, and I feel comfortable in my own skin here. And actually, you know, I can circle back to where we began. I don't consider this, you know, there's a hierarchy for sure. You know, some people have, you know, people with money always have more power, but generally, I think people in the city feel that, you know, there's an egalitarian sort of zeitgeist to it. And that, you know, people can be anything they want to be, and can pursue anything they want to pursue. And that's part of the problem why I think we have such a struggle right now, is that sense. What I love most about this place is shakier than it once was. And that's what people are really struggling with.
Kathleen, thank you so much for coming on and providing so much insight to people. Folks, listeners, you Eastern Canadians, Atlantic Canadians who want to understand the country, listen to the West of Centre podcast. It's a great weekly dissection of what's going on in the Prairie provinces, particularly politically and otherwise. And it's an important part of the country. So please pay attention and listen. Kathleen, keep educating people, and we'll work it out.
My absolute pleasure to do this, David. I can tell you I was thrilled when you asked, because I'm such a fan, and you know that I'm always tweeting out the Herle Burly and even sort of pointing out very specific things that you guys have talked about. So I am a huge fan of yours, and I look forward to the podcast every week. And thanks for inviting me. It was really fun.
Well, this is our best one. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
So, it's been 2021 for a couple of days now. Feel much different? Me neither. But most of us have never entered a new year so heavily laden with hope and expectations as this one. Will we return to the office in 2021? Will we be able to go to bars and restaurants? Will we be able to shake hands and have friends over for dinner and dance? Will the borders open up again? Will our grandparents regain the human contact they so richly deserve? Will we be able to lose the masks? Will I ever leave my cottage? Well, we'll find out, won't we? Meanwhile, we can take some comfort from all those things that don't change, come what may. The bedrock of our lives remains intact. The center holds. Our governments still work. Our first responders still respond. Our hospitals function. And fuel and electricity and food and staples still arrive. It's cliche to say this, but I'll say it anyway. It doesn't happen by itself. The center holds because good people step up every day to make sure it does. The 25,000 employees of our sponsor, CN, are among those people. They've been on the job every day since the pandemic began. The trains have run on time, and they've kept delivering everything we need, from raw materials to groceries to just about every manufactured item you can name. If you've got it, a train probably brought it. CN wishes everyone a most bodacious new year, one that lives up to all of our anxious expectations. And it promises to keep the economy moving, come what may. How are you guys? Great to see you.
Great to see you.
Haven't seen you for weeks. How you doing, Jenni?
Oh, don't lie. We were together in Barbados, eating a pig, laughing at the small people stuck in the cold.
I'm doing great. Full disclosure, I'm in Florida. I have been here for a couple of weeks. I'm staying for much more time. I'm wearing a collared shirt and sweater, and I was going to actually have a Queen's Park background, but I couldn't figure out how to use that on the Zoom. So it'll only be half a joke.
Well, that's your choice, Jenny, but I just hope you know that David and I have called to inform you that you will be forced to resign your position as parliamentary secretary to fucking beating people up. And therefore, we will be issuing a statement correcting you in public.
All right,
Jenny,
I'm happy
I just
to
want
have
to
this
say,
conversation.
Before you come at me, this is not a We shirt. This is a shirt by the band called The Specials that sells We Sell Hope. So just the top of it says we, and I didn't want you to get the wrong impression that this was something I picked up on a trip to Africa or something.
I was going to say something, actually.
I have much we paraphernalia, so we can get into that if this starts to get bogged down and Conservatives resigning.
Scott, how was your holiday?
You know, it was fine. It was fine. But I'm between the holiday, which is basically contained to your house, and online learning, which was what was happening in my household before Christmas because there was an outbreak at my son's school. So I had like one or both of them home for at least the 3 weeks prior to Christmas. Now, of course, they're doing online learning. My complaint isn't so much about the holiday. It's just that and I know people are suffering from isolation. I know that people are genuinely struggling out there because they're by themselves. They're feeling locked up. They're feeling starved for interaction. I am not suffering that ailment. I love my family, but I wish I didn't have as much of them. I wish that my beautiful children go to a school or another place. I wish that I could be alone. I'm an only child and I crave, Jenny, David, I crave solitary life. And
you don't actually like people. Alone.
No, I don't.
You don't actually like people.
I like myself so much that it crowds out my capacity to care for anyone else. And it's very difficult. The pandemic is forcing me to interact nonstop around the clock with my family. And I just want to sit alone, and going to the basement isn't good enough. That's not, I want blocks of lone time. I want large portions of nothing but Scott, and I can't get it. And it's starting to bear down on me. Other than that, it was very Happy New Year, by the way.
Boy, I'm telling you, I wouldn't have got a more negative report about his holiday from Rod Phillips.
Well, David, how was your holiday? You before we get into the fun stuff.
My holiday was, nice as it could be. It's the first time that I can remember really that I wasn't in Regina with my family, and I missed that. But I did get to, since we've been living together with Terry's family up here, we did have a family Christmas, and it was nice. And the weather's been good up here, and I think I'm okay. But I really don't have anything to judge it against. I don't have
rustically
people.
Outdoors. Like, do you can you build things now from kindling? Do you snowshoe? Have you made a crossbow and shot your own game? Like any of those things?
Well, you're making fun of me, but I do snowshoe. I do snowshoe almost every day. It's a great way of exercising the dog and me. Yeah, snowshoe almost every day. And I cut down our Christmas tree from the forest and hauled it into the house.
You guys are like the wilderness
Jesus,
family.
like Grandpa Walton. Holy fuck.
I don't want to be Grandpa Walton. Maybe Jed Clampett. But yeah, anyway, so I had a good Christmas and everything's fine. Let's get into it.
All right.
Traveling politicians. Jenny, I half expected you to show up today with a mariachi band, reunited from when you welcomed Senator Andrew Thompson back from was it Andrew Thompson? Is that his name?
Yeah, it was Andrew Thompson. He lived in Mexico. He came back for like the bare minimum of days that you could come back for, and so one of the times he was coming back, after caucus hired a mariachi band, and Deb Gray did a press conference, and I was working part-time for Grant McNally, who was the MP for Dudney-Alouette, which is Maple Ridge in BC at the time. And so my job was to hand out burritos to the press gallery. and wear a big hat.
I saw a picture of you with a big sombrero.
Gotta start somewhere.
Okay, so this thing was so obvious to everybody who wasn't involved the second they saw it. Any journalist, anybody involved in politics, any citizen who saw politicians having gone abroad over the holidays. And Jenni, you called them out preemptively on this, on our pod. So what were they thinking? Can we just start with that? Did they lose their minds? I mean, how is what was obvious to everybody else not obvious to them?
Yeah, so I think that so politicians were either extremely tone deaf and didn't understand how this is an issue, which stuns me, or it's this entitlement that they feel that they've worked very hard. Of course, the pandemic's been very hard on politicians over the last 10 months. Everyone else, not so much. And it's kind of like the Animal Farm quote: all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Do you think, Scott, that they thought it was okay and they're that tone deaf, or did they? It looks to me like they thought they'd get away with it.
I think there's more than one thing happening. I think, I think there are folks that could belong to any party. Rod Phillips is the example of it. Rod Phillips could easily have done what he've done and be a liberal or New Democrat, right? That's that sense of, well, I'm just going to do it. And, I don't know that he was trying to cover up that he was doing it. I think he wanted to avoid declaring that he was doing it, right? And I think that's just flat out, as Jenni says, flat out entitlement, right? It's like, hey, what the hell? Yeah, but it's me. I promised my wife we'd do this. I want to do this. I've said we're going to do this. And I think there's examples of that from all parties, and anybody from any party could be guilty of it. Then I think there's people that subscribe to they got a different point of view. And I think this is particularly true among conservatives, which is, it's kind of the libertarian instinct. I'm not going to let the government tell me what to do. They can go fuck off, even if they're part of government, right? Because so much of, that libertarian streak that we find is based around that. And people repeat that rhetoric and then they apply it to themselves without making the connection that, well, actually I'm in government and we are telling people this, and therefore I'm going to have to subscribe to it. And so I think, and then you get all these other people, which I think are thornier examples where people were traveling. They shouldn't have done it. They shouldn't have traveled overseas to see, for a funeral or whatever. And I think that's kind of a kettle of fish. But so I think there's more than one thing going on. But the bottom line is, if you're an elected government that is advising people to not do things, you can't do them yourself. You just can't.
But it looks to me, I look at Phillips or Allard. I don't believe that they thought at the time that they could have explained that to their constituents if they had to. I think they knew it was wrong.
I absolutely, and in case of Rod, the cover up is almost worse than the crime. The fact that there was so much effort put in to taking pictures of the 12 days of local business and that horrific video that played actually around the world. Like, I'm sure Rod Phillips was not thinking that this would be his foray into international media. It's very galling for a politician, the finance minister of the second biggest economy in the country, to sit there and say, we're all in this together. We can't travel. This is going to be different. And then basically 3 days later, whenever he taped it, jump on a plane for a 3-week vacation in St. Bart's, one of the richest places in the world to go and vacation. So I think the cover up was basically what pissed people off the most. But this is the issue the Conservatives have. This is the issue Doug's going to have. This is the issue Kenny is going to have on this is conservative voters get the most angry about this. So this is not just about hypocrisy. This is about sheer entitlement. And these are things that I know the Conservative Party very well, having lived through iterations of it. This is something they're not going to support. And I think for Rod especially, it's the general hypocrisy. And, you know, I've heard from people in the last few days going, well, Rod was a good finance minister. Yes, I agree with that. What I don't agree with, though, is this thought from some people that support him that he's going to be back in cabinet in the next 6 months. I don't think that any minister who traveled and has had to step away, unless governments think that COVID is going to be gone in 6 months and it's not going to be an issue. And I know we're going to get into vaccines. So, of course, it is going to be an issue. I don't see any universe where Allard, Phillips, the two ministers from Saskatchewan, I don't see any universe where they're back in cabinet, I think ever, but at the very least until after an election.
I agree with that. And, you know, I've also encountered tons of people saying to me, look, obviously, you know, Rod shit the bed. He's going to have to take a time out. He's going to, you know, take some time out of cabinet. He'll come back. But, you know, this guy's going to bounce back. His political career is going to bounce back. And sure, we've seen unlikely comebacks. We've seen comebacks of all sorts. So, and I'm not trying to like kick the guy when he's down. But from my perspective, the nature of what occurred here means that, like, unless he defeats Ultron in personal combat, this is the thing that people will remember most about Rod for the rest of his political life. Like, this is the defining act of his political life. And I just do not believe that he's going to be able to pop back into cabinet 8 months from now and then 3 years from now run for leader and this is behind him. I just don't think that's how the real world's going to work.
Oh, that ship has sailed. Like I
hear that from people, though. You must. I hear people saying he might does time in the penalty box.
Except for very few people around him. I was shocked at the number of people and who the people were that had communicated publicly or who I'd spoken to that were angry about this. So I personally don't see any maybe a path back to cabinet, but not a path back for leader. I think that. As I said, I think the final nail in the coffin with people, even people that I had guessed were supporters of his, was the video that he did, and you know, and it was very staged. Like, could you imagine that being the comms person, like filming it, going, "All right, sir, let's just do it one more time, but this time at the end, lean over, grab an eggnog, and take a sip."
Crack some chestnuts, sir. Can I go poli-sci nerd for 1 sec, though? Because you said something that I think is interesting and it's worth exploring. You said that conservatives are harder.
Yeah. This is the thing
on themselves than others, and I'm.
No, I mean harder on these issues. But when it's one of their own, they're harder on them than what they would be on liberals because they expect more from conservative politicians.
See, I don't think I agree with that. So here's so a couple things. One, I think it's super dangerous for liberals to be guilty of this kind of thing because the standing definitional problem for liberals is a sense of, well, we're born to be in government, we're entitled to certain things, and therefore we don't. It's why this stuff is so toxic to liberals. And I think that the challenge for conservatives is that it's damning because it seems to be in contradiction to their anti-elitism. But it brings this stuff brings two strands together that are in open conflict now. One strand is this libertarian aspect where you talk about, you know what, don't trust government, and this is all bullshit. Nobody should be telling you freedom. When people put freedom in their Twitter handles and all this kind of stuff, including elected officials, all this kind of horse shit, small anti-government, not just small government, but anti-government. Government is the enemy kind of stuff. So you got that strain.
There were very few conservative members that actually subscribe to that.
Well, I see it all over the place. I see it all over the place.
Well, my take, Scott, let me just
wait. Can I finish? Because I just want to finish. I want to put the two things together. Because on the one hand, you've got this libertarian, don't let government tell you what your choices are kind of thing, and that causes you to be in this place where they bristle against this kind of public guidance, where government must. If you're in government as a conservative, you have a collective obligation to say to people, sorry, we're going to have to not do certain things. Then the other thing is this populist anti-elitist strain, which calls out hypocritical behavior, calls out harder than anyone else this do as I say, not as I do kind of stuff. And so those two things are in conflict. Some of those MLAs in Alberta subscribe to this kind of libertarian, I'll do what the hell I want, I hate government telling me what to do thing, but they also subscribe to this, anti-elite, all these people look after themselves first. And these things are now in conflict and they're crashing into one another. I think that's uniquely challenging for conservatives.
I think you're overthinking this. I think people are angry at the hypocrisy by politicians. And these politicians, by the way, are unlike most of their constituents. They can easily go and quarantine. Let's just use Rod, for example. He was going on a 3-week vacation and then would have to quarantine for 2 weeks when he came back. Who in the world could take 5 weeks off of work? This is less about ideology than it is about practical. There are so many people in this country that do not have the ability, the luxury to be able to sit in their home for 2 weeks in quarantine because their job requires them to be out of the house. Look at, let's say a family of 5 decides they have the money to come to Florida or wherever for a vacation. So the government is requiring people to come in and have PCR tests. I'm not against that, but PCR tests in the States aren't used as much as the rapid testing now. They've moved on to more accurate, quicker tests. So PCR tests here are about $200. So that's another $1,000 on a family if they want to take a vacation. And so I think it's less about ideology, Scott, than it is about the fact that these guys have had a steady paycheck, have had a steady job, have had all benefits, job security for the most part, and they have the luxury to be able to go away for 3 weeks or 2 weeks and then work from their home. And most Canadians can't do that.
That's why I said at the
beginning. So, Jenny, wait a second, Scott. I want to jump in. Scott, Jenny, I want to follow up on what you said earlier because I'm interested in it, which is that it's true in Ontario, but it feels even more true in Alberta, that the outrage came from conservatives, that as this issue blew up and all of the usual suspects against Kenney lined up to attack him, the usual suspects didn't line up on the other side to defend him. They were equally, if not more, outraged, whether those are journalists or whether those are activists in the party or whether they're former elected members. What do you think it is about conservatives that made them so offended by this that they abandoned their partisanship?
Well, I think you saw it in Ontario to a certain degree. People were more quiet. It's also a different time of year. All the stuff with Rod happened the week between Christmas and New Year's, and people were less engaged. The stuff with Jason started kind of the Saturday, this past weekend. I think people have been, I think Jason was in a tough place going into even when the pandemic started. We've talked about that before. But in terms of, and it is funny, there were more conservatives that were engaged. I don't know why, in terms of being online and what have you. But and the fact of the matter, if you look at how the two handled it, there was about the same amount of time between Rod's it becoming public. He was in St. Bart's. Originally, he said he was in St. Lucia, and then him resigning from cabinet to when Jason. When it became public about Allard and the others, until when they resigned. The only difference is how they handled it. Doug put out a statement. Doug then did a quick pick or a photo op where he made a statement to the press. The difference is Jason went out, gave a statement, and then spent an hour defending. And I think that's probably what incensed, especially like the Rick Bells of the Calgary Sun and stuff, is because there was more of a defense. Doug basically made a statement and then kind of walked away. So
there's another difference, Jenny, which is that Ford pulled the plug on Phillips as soon as he met him, and Kenney's New Year's Day news conference. I mean, I'd love to know what they were thinking about that news conference, because it looked so wrong when it happened.
But yeah, so David, that's the difference. What I said is so Jason doubled down. Doug essentially doubled down. The part that hurts Doug the most is he knew for 2.5 weeks that, or at least 2 weeks, that Rod was in St. Bart's. Like his finance minister sat through 3 cabinet meetings while the province discussed shutting down further small businesses and restaurants and people's livelihoods, and shutting down the entire province, even in areas where it's in the green zone where there's no COVID. So that's where I think Doug's exposed. And let's be honest, Doug hasn't been out to answer questions since this all happened. And we'll see if the media decide to ask some of the some of the questions that I know people are thinking.
Isn't there another dimension to this, like a practical issues management dimension, in terms of close to you thing? And close to you meaning you're talking about people that you know and you work with and having to deal with it. And we all are confronted with those situations in politics sometime. Okay, well, this guy's done this. Do we have to dump them? What do we do? But in this situation, I think that, and I'm in no way making excuses, because I think Kenny mishandled this badly in a way that may be very corrosive for the rest of his leadership. It creates vulnerabilities for him on both sides of the political spectrum, and obviously has alienated him from what should be his natural constituency among media supporters. But I think the difference might be in terms of the management of it. You're going, okay, we've got Rod, and this thing is bad. And you go, Jesus, Rod, he's such a big powerhouse here inside the government. We don't want to let him go. And so he drags his feet, and then he realizes the thing is moving so fast that you got to cut him loose. So that's what goes on. Whereas I think maybe, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Jenni, in Edmonton for Kenny, they're sitting around a boardroom table and they're going, okay, it's not just about dumping Allard, because Christ almighty, if that's the standard we're going to set, then we've got to lose the chief of staff. Now the office and the premier are talking about cutting loose their very own, right? Like people in the office, the people that hold the day-to-day operation together, and like, okay, so we got to dump the chief of staff. Does that mean the issues guy has to go too, because he went to Saskatchewan? Doesn't seem like it's the same thing, but will people assert that it is? Where do we draw the boundary? Okay, we got 3 other caucus members. Holy fuck, are you kidding me? Now, so you start going and you go, all right, well, if I move on Allard, that means I may have to move on 4 or 5 people, and that makes it just practically, it made it a tougher decision, both politically and I think personally for them. And then Kenny goes out as he does and sort of does this defense where he's like, hey, you know what, back off. I think we want to support WestJet and all this stuff. And it just enrages the Rick Bells of the world. And the next thing you know, he's down a well.
Yeah,
sure. That's an incredibly difficult conversation to be having, Jenni. But we always say, cold-bloodedly assess where it's going to go, where it has to end up, and get there. So, I mean, you only get one chance to get that right, and that, they had to bite the bullet before that news conference.
But yes, Jason screwed up with the news conference, and I still think there's going to be questions about when Doug found out and who else in his office knew. I think they're all valid questions that are going to come out. I just think Jason's been more in front of the press than what Doug is. But I agree with you, Scott. I think those conversations absolutely were absolutely happening. It's tough to lose. It's tough to lose staffers. I know that there was between the story about Mike Duffy and the $90,000 check, there was 5 to 6 days where before Nigel resigned back in 2013 when that all went down. So it's a very hard discussion to have. But I can guarantee you, if Stephen Harper was Prime Minister and we were in the middle of this pandemic, I can guarantee you not one minister would have traveled, because someone like me or one of my staff would be on the FaceTiming them going, all right, I want you to hold up where you are. Yeah. Like, are you still in your living room?
Proof of life.
Proof of life. Like that would have happened. And I don't think anyone in our cabinet would have any iteration of our cabinet would have gone.
So
if Kenny,
my sense is that, go ahead, Scott, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask Jenni, if Kenny does a good job in the next 2-3 months of vaccine rollout, just for the sake of discussion. Yeah. I think he's in a real political deficit right now for a whole pile of reasons, and this has really become an accelerant on it. But if he gets that most important challenge relatively right over the course of the next 2-3 months, does that make this go away? How much does it diminish it? Or do you think he's like, I'm struck by the tone of
he has to do something more. He has to do something more, Scott. I mean, I read Rick Bell again this morning, and Rick Bell's as loyal a conservative supporter as you're going to find in the media, and he's not letting up. And
they're swinging bats.
They're not letting up, and I think that Ford, by moving as quickly once it was found out. Ford did not move quickly. Ford moved quickly once it was found out. by doing that, he may have insulated himself from it. But I feel like in Alberta, it's about Jason now. It's about the premier. It's not about Allard.
I think it's more about Jason than it is about Doug personally here. But Doug didn't move. Doug waited until he got here, but it was from the time the story broke till Rod's resignation. It was 4 days because it's apparently St. Bart's is a very tough island to leave. It's like the Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave. So I think it is.
Well, they have to get all the gold lame off of you. And
so I think it is more personal. I think there's a lot of runway for Jason. He's got a lot of time before the election, and I know we're going to get into vaccines, but Alberta leads the actual administration of vaccines per capita than any other province.
Before we move off this subject, can I just ask you, are all of these cases the same? And did they all deserve the same discipline? Rod Phillips went to St. Bart's, pure vacation. Allard went to Hawaii, pure vacation. Some people went to see their dying family members. Same thing?
Unfortunately for government members, yes. There are a lot of people who haven't been able to visit their loved ones in long-term care. There's a lot of people in long-term care who have passed away alone. There's a lot of people. A good friend of mine's mother passed away earlier this year. They haven't been able to have a funeral. And as someone who lost my mom 10 years ago, I can tell you that was part of the grieving process for me and my sister and my dad. And so I just think that, unfortunately for government members, you guys are part of a government that is telling people that they shouldn't travel. And I know that legally no one did anything wrong. The borders are open, what have you. Then it's unfortunately the answer is yes.
You know, I've thought a lot about this because in my heart of hearts, I don't see them as the same. But then when you think about how you would apply the standard, I've come to the same conclusion as Jenni. I don't know how else you can defend it and rationalize it. I think the one asterisk for me is when we get into backdating the standard. So over the holiday period, when we had here in Ontario, as an example, a new set of lockdown rules, I get that. I think when we're talking about, well, somebody traveled in August or September, then, you know, to me, that's a little bit blurrier. You go, well, hang on, what was the relative standard in terms of how open we were then? What was the public health guidance? So I think some of those cases,
I agree.
I don't think it's so much about whether you travel. It comes down to when, as opposed to why. As much as I want to be sympathetic about some of the whys, I think it's about when. And I think if you're traveling over the holiday period and you were in government, you got to bear the brunt.
I've been thinking about it a lot too, and I agree with you both that the discipline or the sanction has to be the same. But also being honest with you, having thought about it a lot as I read a couple of those fact situations, I'm not sure I would have made a different decision. If you said to me, you get to see your grandmother one more time, but you have to lose your parliamentary secretary spot to do it, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done that. I don't know. But I understand that the sanction has to.
I think there's also an alternative universe in which people made that decision and made a public statement and said, listen, I've offered my resignation for this because I'm going to breach the rules because of this reason. Then you would have actually had probably a fair degree of public sympathy. But right now they're just going back and saying, all right, you know, who crossed the boundary.
All right. Okay. Happier subject even yet. Let's talk about vaccines. Apparently they're very cold. Apparently they're well refrigerated, our vaccines. We've talked about this and debated at times whether this was going to be an important political issue. Feels to me like it already is a pretty hot political issue. You guys?
Oh, yes. And I think that Justin Trudeau should send fruit baskets to all the premiers because they have helped him manage the fact that we have acquired less vaccines than per capita that we've received. I'm not saying procured, received. But because they've been shipped out and the provinces have been so slow on getting them out, it's been able to give cover to Trudeau.
It's an astonishing.
Totally, they've let him off the hook completely. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I was just agreeing. I mean, it's an astonishing reversal of fortune. A month ago, literally almost a month ago, we were all going, holy smokes, is this an issue that's going to snowball through Trudeau and really cause peril for his government, maybe threaten his ability to govern in the spring because we have an election forced over this issue? And now it's all about the efficacy of provincial efforts to get needles into arms. And so that's a political look at it. From a substantive standpoint, I don't understand it. Like, I literally don't understand it. We've all been in government. I don't understand how in September and October and November, I just can't,
But try to explain it. Try to explain it, because we have to assume that these provincial governments are as unhappy about this as anybody is, perhaps more. We have to assume that they would love to be vaccinating people and looking like heroes to their populations. So it's not like they don't care or they're sitting around fucking the dog. They can't get it done. Why can't they get it done?
I don't understand that. Oh, Jenni, you answer. You take a crack.
I don't know, because you look at other jurisdictions, like there have been, I saw a stat yesterday, more people have been vaccinated in the state of Alabama than all of Canada. And you look at countries that are doing this.
Fuck, I hate negative Alabama comparisons. There's nothing worse than a negative Alabama comparison.
That old SNL skit, right? And I'm coming for you, Mississippi.
No, I'm just saying, but look in terms of like I'm talking about in terms of size. Like, these people have their act together. Look at Israel. In Israel, 14% of their population is vaccinated. 50% of people 60 and over have been vaccinated. So there obviously are systems that countries have found in place that they're able to do this in an efficient, quick way. In Israel, they have pop-up centers. They're going 24 hours a day. Washington State has the priority list of people. And if the priority list at the end of the day don't show up and there's 12 more vials left or what have you, they call people and they're like, can you be here in an hour to get a vaccine? And so I just think there has to be ways, there has to be a more efficient ways that all governments across the board can kind of utilize.
So doesn't Canada vaccinate a bunch of people all the time? Like every year, don't we vaccinate a bunch of people for various things? So why did they want to reinvent the whole system if we already have a system in place? Like, why'd they bring in Hillier to invent some different thing? I mean, I don't know whether you guys like Hillier or not. I remember when he convinced John Manley. I remember when he convinced John Manley that if he got 1,000 troops in a chopper, he could drive the Taliban out of Kandahar. But so I hope this goes better.
The only fair thing I can think to sum it up is that some of the comparisons internationally are not entirely fair. Like, Israel is doing a better job, but they're also highly urbanized. It's a smaller place, all that stuff. So it should be tougher for Canada than it is for there. But setting aside those things, it's your, I was talking to officials at the WHO in the fall, David, and I talked to them about, I said at that point, well, how big isn't this going to be a massive logistical operation and deployment? And their attitude was, it's going to be big, but it ought to be pretty straightforward. I mean, because we do the flu vaccine. So, some may be 2 shots, 1 shot, but still those mechanisms and channels exist. So you start with hospitals, doctors' offices, pharmacies, then you replicate and parallel those mechanisms. And then if demand is sufficient and if supplies are in existence, then maybe you look at pop-up clinics, in the grandest notion of it, you actually employ, the military.
Schools. How difficult would it be to do schools?
So exactly. So
how difficult would it be to do schools?
It hasn't been tested on kids yet. They're still doing clinical trials. So kids under 18 or 16, I don't think
that's fair.
Can get it.
Okay.
So I think schools wouldn't be an issue.
But the fundamental answer to your question, David, the reason I don't think there's a good answer to your question is that it's not been provided. To your point, which is, look, nobody wants to be in this position politically. Right? Jason Kenney doesn't want to be there. Doug Ford certainly doesn't want to be there. The premier of BC is getting the shit kicked out of him on this stuff. They don't want to be in that position. And since they don't want to be, then you would have every incentive on earth to come forward and hold a technical briefing and say, guys, I'm going to walk you through A to Z. Here's what's happening. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what hasn't happened and why. These are the choices that are available to us where we've exercised discretion, the choices we've made and why we made them. Nobody's done that. they're doing it in Ontario today, and I bet they do a half-assed job of it. And I think the only reason they haven't done it is because those answers aren't good. And I believe this. I believe that if there was a provincial government, that Jenni Byrne was working in the office of the premier, and they had said in September and October, we need to start marshalling a plan now where we galvanize our resources. We imagine a couple of different platforms for vaccines, and then we say, what will it take to get that out? That the job would have gotten done. And I just can't for the life of me understand. I don't know what Rick Hillier has been doing, but it isn't good enough. And there's just no way around that as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and they're not the only one. Quebec's only, so Ontario's at 33% of what the doses that they've received are in arms. Quebec's only at 35%. And so you've got the two hardest hit provinces that are the ones that seemingly are the slowest in terms of getting the vaccine. And you'd think that should be one of their main focus, because there's a lot of talk about this week. I saw on social media in terms of a COVID zero policy, and Canada should follow the way of Melbourne. And yesterday Alberta put out basically their vaccine schedule, and they said that general vaccination of non-compromised people is going to start in the fall of 2021. And I think that that's probably the case across the board. And Alberta's the first province to have the guts to go out and actually say, this is what the actual timetable is. So that's what it's going to get. Like if the provinces get their shit together and they actually get ramped up and they're starting to do this more than the 4,000 to 6,000 actual vaccinations a day, and they catch up, and there is actually a shortage based on the supply that we're getting into the country, then it's going to go back being dicey for the Liberals.
I think. Okay, Jenni. So Trudeau is not, near as I can tell, pretty much said we'll all be vaccinated by September, or that we'll have herd immunity by September. That's sort of the federal government's timeline. Now the Alberta government says, and officially, so it's on the website, that they're not going to start the general population until the fall, as you just said, which I found kind of shocking. But how's the politics of that going to play out ultimately? If people are angry that the vaccination is going slowly, and Trudeau promised it by the end of the summer, and it doesn't start till after the summer, who's ultimately going to bear the brunt of that?
Well, it'll depend on what I said. If the provinces have caught up and are actually up to capacity, where you don't have 140,000 doses sitting in a freezer, or once we get AstraZeneca, I don't think it has to be as cold. If they've caught up and we're behind, there's a shortage in actually getting vaccines delivered to us, then I think the blame will turn to the feds. But I think if it stays kind of like this, I think the blame will be on the provinces. I think for Ontario, for example, I saw Robin Urbach tweeted yesterday that by her calculation, it would take 8 years to vaccinate everyone in Ontario based on the current timeline.
The yardsticks will move. The yardsticks will move on both supply and rollout, right? We were talking in December going, there's only going to be 150,000 doses by the end of March. And that quickly galloped away. And so I think you're going to see that, we're going to see manufacturing boot up. We're going to see more approvals of other platforms. And so we're going to see supply kick up. We're going to see the provinces, really put the accelerator to the mat on this thing. So we'll see change, which is why I was puzzled actually by the decision of the Alberta government to say not until September. Given how fluid the situation is, why would you commit yourself to that? Isn't that almost I don't know how you make a prediction that's 9 months down the road at this point. I don't know that I wouldn't make a good prediction for 9 months down the road, much less a negative one, because I think the only thing that's certain is that a lot will change in 9 months.
Well, I think they're just being honest. As I said, I think that I think most provinces know that, or that's going to be the case. So I think they're the first out of the gate to say that, and it's opened it up that other premiers are going to, and other health officials are going to be asked from this in across the country.
So how does everything hold? Let's say that's the case. Let's say that the Alberta government timeline is the right timeline, the way things happen. Things seem increasingly panicky to me, the anxiety I'm detecting from experts set on Twitter seems to be rising. This, notion about administering only one dose when there's no evidence about that feels like a panicky thing to me. And how do you think we're going to hold together for the next 6 to 9 months?
I think it's going to be very, very rough. I think that people were expecting that this vaccine was going to open things up. I think the longer we go through lockdowns, and I think that probably Ontario will follow the same way as Quebec in terms of curfews and what have you. And March and April and May are a lot different months than January, February, and March to be to basically essentially be isolated. And I think that this is going to be the ongoing challenge. And I know we talked about it being a challenge last year. It's going to be even more of the balances that people are going to have to, that governments are going to have to factor in, because people are getting less and less. They don't believe what politicians are saying anymore. Because not only just for hypocrisy, but there always seems to be different like stories. We're going to have everyone will be vaccinated by the end of the year, and now they're not. And so people are getting frustrated and they're getting lonely. And I think you're going to just see more. I think you're going to see more of a frustration. There was a poll out. Leger did a poll that 48% of people went and saw family members during Christmas because they couldn't go longer. It had almost been a year. So I just think that this is going to be a huge balancing weight that governments are going to have. And for governments, I know there's healthcare officials, and then you have in press conferences where, politicians are saying, well, we'll go into a Melbourne style lockdown. I don't think Canadians fully understand what a Melbourne style lockdown was. I don't think they realized that you could only go for a 5-kilometer drive. You could only go 5 kilometers from where you lived. I don't think they realized there were checkpoints at neighborhoods. I don't think they realized there were checkpoints at states. I don't think they realized their borders are closed. There are 39,000 Australians registered with their embassy that can't get home. And the government figures there's another 100,000 because they only let, they started with 4, they only let 7,000 Australians back into the country on a weekly basis. So I don't think that Canadians fully comprehend what that would mean in terms of if we did that for the next 3 months.
Scott, you any thoughts on how we maintain some social solidarity through this year?
Not really. I mean, it's just not my area of expertise. I just don't know how the world's going to unfold. My instinct, because my natural instinct is always toward the pessimistic, is that we're going to have an extraordinarily difficult winter, that we are going to see that the variant has infected. We're going to see transmission rates rise. We're going to see a foot race between that and vaccinations among those that are most vulnerable. And I think it's going to be, I think we're going to see manufacturing and workplaces targeted by public health officials. They're going to start moving and locking them down. I think schools are going to get locked down. So I think we're going to end up in January, February, March. Those are going to be, late January, February, March. I think those are going to be really long, dark months. And I'm digging a well in my backyard just in case. I think, this could go hardcore. But I think that once we get through 50, 60, 70% of the most vulnerable populations, then I think we may find that that things start to improve more rapidly. Because once you've gotten to a place where those who are most vulnerable, where once you get to a place where transmission doesn't necessarily equal threat of death or hospitalization, then maybe that means that you can ease up. And so the last 6 months of the vaccination rollout will be much less dire than the first 3 months. But I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just making up stuff. I'm basically, reading things and extrapolating. What I do know is I'm convinced it's going to be extraordinarily punishing for 2-3 months. And I think that people's capacity to manage that is much greater than we expect. People will hate it. People won't like it. There will be lots of mental health stress. There will be higher increases in domestics and all sorts of challenges and alcoholism and addiction issues. But I think that our ability to rally, I mean, this is a cliche. People went through a war. People went through depression. I think our ability to hold together through that kind of challenge is greater than we think. It's just a fucking misery.
Think the Prime Minister should go back on television?
On a daily
basis? Try to reset? No. I mean, an address. And I didn't like the last one he did because it was too political. It started off good on the pandemic and then it got a little bit political. But I'm wondering whether this isn't an important enough time for him to do kind of a reset with us about where things are at and what we need to do and get us refocused.
I think that a lot of Canadians would look at it like if it wasn't just I think if there's something the government has to announce that's new, I think the Prime Minister should go out and announce it. I think he should be available for questions. I don't think daily, but I think this whole "we're in this together" bullshit and we'll get through this. At this point, I think most people would say "fuck you" to the TV.
I'm not as convinced, but I think the real issue is he can't do that reset address until there's clarity. And I don't know when clarity emerges. Like there's got to be a measure of clarity in terms of, okay, we think we know now what the general track is going to be with respect to supply of vaccines. We know what the general track with respect to vaccination rates in most provinces is going to be. We can identify what the arc of sacrifice is going to be and what that scale of sacrifice is going to be. I think maybe at that moment, but again, how do you evaluate that? I assume we're a couple of weeks away from that. Feels like provinces are scrambling ass right now in terms of rebooting their vaccination rollout programs, as we've just discussed. And I think there's a lot more work to do on procurement and distribution at the federal level. So until those two pieces fall into place, I don't think you can have that address. And then, of course, there's the third component, which is what are you saying with respect to relief programs? Because if manufacturing and other fundamental big employers have to shut down or retract, then we're back into a world of envisioning relief programs of at minimum what we had before, but probably slightly different in their orientation also. So you need to have answers before you start emoting.
So if the provinces, if Ontario follows Quebec in terms of what Quebec is reported to be doing tomorrow, does this mean if there's pressure? Does this mean the feds will move up whenever they're planning on delivering their budget, the first one in 2 years?
I would have the exact opposite instinct if I were them. I know that you complain about it and not without justification, but I don't want to go in. If I'm Chrystia Freeland, I don't want to move into the public marketplace and start telling people this is what the arc is going to be. If 3 weeks later, I'm going to be required to invent from whole cloth a brand new wage program or a major employer relief program on a scale that we've never witnessed before. So, I mean, I hope that some contingency planning on all that stuff's been done already, but
well, there may never be a good time, Scott, but doesn't there ultimately have to be one?
Yes.
I mean, can we just go forever without one? I mean, it's never an ideal time.
But November would have been a better time than now. I think we're more in a moment of flux, and maybe that is relieved 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now. 6 weeks, I mean. I still think a March budget is the right time.
Well, but what if Quebec goes as of Friday or Saturday where they're shutting down industry? So they're now talking manufacturing and construction. If Ontario follows suit, can the federal government, because you're talking about it's going to be the feds that are going to pony up a lot of the money in terms of wage subsidies and subsidizations of people's income, and whether I agree with it or not, if that's what their plan is to do, and you've got lockdown and industry shut down in mid-January, can you wait till March to actually deliver a budget with these measures?
Sure. You announce the measures and you account for them and lay it out in whole in a budget, 5 weeks after they've been announced. But yeah, I think you can. Look, I mean, the budget isn't going to reveal any great secrets that we don't already understand. It's going to cost a fuckload, and there's no plan to pay it down until this thing is buried and in the ground, the virus. So, I mean, that's just the truth of it. And it doesn't matter who's in government. That's going to be the reality that anybody has to carry around. It's why it's very dangerous for O'Toole to make fiscal probity a core message. You hear it by reflex from some conservatives, but I'd be very careful if I were him. I don't want to make that a ballot question.
Well, we shall see where all the budget stuff goes, but it sure wouldn't be surprising if there was more income support that had to be rolled out this fall, and I think at some point we need to hear an accounting. We need to hear an accounting about that. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, you hear people pop up every once in a while and say, since that stuff is baked in, whether it's this big or this big, isn't the real question that government should be answering or thinking about is, what does a growth strategy look like? Like, how do you like, everyone's going to be trying to dig out.
I would have expected the budget to give us some detail on what the $100 billion is for.
Exactly.
How they imagine spending that.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, I just think that, but it's hard. Yes. I think it's, I just think that's where I'd like to see, as opposed to sweating about how much is being spent. And I don't mean to be glib about it, because these are dollars beyond measure. I'd like to know at least as much about what can we do relative to other jurisdictions to try to come out of this as hard as possible. And I'm not talking about a reset program. I'm not talking about making everything in the world green. I'm saying, like, literally, like, how do we create jobs? What should we be doing? That's, with the core growth strategy. Hopefully someone's planning that.
All right, kids, we're getting close to the end here. So it's time for our Hey You segment. One of our last Hey You segments, maybe our last Hey You segment, was pretty good because Jenni was extraordinarily prescient about the news story that was going to dominate the holiday period. So
I wasn't even thinking of him. I wasn't even thinking of him when I said it.
No, and you probably couldn't even have imagined that it would be St. Bart's. But anyway, let's start with you, Jenni. Who's your Hey You at today?
So my Hey You is at the federal Liberal government. So I think it was a great step to hear that they're going to be requiring testing upon coming into the country. I'm hoping that this is a step towards adopting the pilot project that's in Alberta in terms of travelers coming in terms of quarantining less times than the 14 days if they have different tests along the way. But ultimately, I'd like to know what plan they have. So if we're going to do further lockdowns, which it's looking like we're doing in the two biggest provinces, 81% of the traffic across the border is essential. So it's truck drivers, it's first aid, first responders, healthcare professionals. I don't understand why the federal government doesn't have a program where they're actually doing rapid testing, because these people are not required to get tests and they're not required to quarantine. And so I think that if we're going to get serious about squashing this, the 81% of Canadian people that are crossing the border, there needs to be some kind of plan. I'm not saying that truck drivers should have to quarantine for 14 days. I just think there should be a program for rapid testing for people that are crossing the border.
Ah, yes, the elusive rapid testing. Oft rumored, never seen rapid testing. Scott, what's your Hey You?
Rapid testing is the snuffleupagus of this virus. It's just, I don't know. Mine, I'm going to reach south of the border for mine, which I know no one's going to reply to it. But my Hey You is to Ted Cruz, right? The Texas senator, who, no matter how much you might dislike him, and I dislike him intensely, he's a smart person, right? He is an accomplished lawyer. He is a learned person. He's smart. He's got political smarts also. And the despicability of someone who is going to declare that they are going to champion the idea of overturning the Electoral College in the United States, that he wants to champion that cause from his post. Why? Not because he has the slightest sympathy for for Donald Trump, who said terrible things about his wife and his father, but because he thinks it gives him the best lock on Trump-esque supporters for the 2024 sweepstakes for the presidential run. Like, to me, it is just to say, well, I'm going to take a corrosive run at foundations of democracy in the democratic process, because I think it might be one of the 3 or 4 things I could do that could slightly advantage me as compared to the rest of the prospective field. That guy is a piece of shit, just a complete garbage human. And so my hey you is, why are you such a garbage piece of shit? And I don't think it will work anyway, because those people will never trust you, Ted Cruz, because you're not one of them, even if you pretend that you are.
My favorite line about Ted Cruz was by Al Franken, who said, "I'm Ted Cruz's best friend in the Senate, and I hate his guts." My hey you goes out to Minister Mary Lee Fullerton of Ontario, who has disappeared entirely from public view. And now there's reports that the commission looking into long-term care is being frustrated by the government in its attempts to get information, asked for an extension, was denied both the information it was looking for and the extension. This is a crisis that continues to unfold in real time here and in every province. And I wish the minister would step up, quit hiding, and actually do something to improve situations in long-term care homes. It's not too late to make a difference in those places. Nothing?
All right.
Right?
I couldn't agree more. She's terrible. But she's just the point of the spear. The real problem is the big, long staff that leads into a premier's office that didn't want to deal with it. Therefore, didn't do a full inquiry. Therefore, hasn't implemented any sort of change since the first wave. And, so
right.
That doesn't relieve her of a responsibility. It just spreads it.
Okay. Scott, you had something funny to end this up on? It's been such a serious and intense conversation.
I don't
give us some levity.
Give some levity. Well, look, I
for people with a visual, that was pretty good.
Yeah. I got nothing. I got nothing, man. I've moved into full on January, right? Like, I always find January is the, I don't understand these people who like tackle January with enthusiasm. It's a new month, a new year. I'm going to have a new resolution. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to improve myself. I'm hunkering down for the winter. I'm Jeremiah Johnson. I'm going to be eating bark and sleeping in a snowbank. I'm a fucking big bag of dark cloud.
All right, folks, despite the fact that my shirt says "We Sell Hope," we didn't have a lot today. Pretty tough day out there in Canadian politics. Jenni, Scott, thanks for coming back and talking with me about it. I'm glad that we're back together after the holidays. And hopefully all of our moods brighten over time. In the meantime, we'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I want to thank Kathleen Petty for being our guest today. So much insight about Alberta and the Prairie provinces. I'll look forward to having her back on sometime in the near future. And I want to thank Jenni and Scott back from their holidays to talk with us about politics again this week. And thank you all for listening. Thanks the Air Quotes Media team for their support. And just because we're kind of down, let's listen to a little bit of the roots rock tones of Ray Martini as we exit this show. So metal, let the Herle Burly run for a little bit. Take care, folks.
Herle Burly.